Clara Whitmore snatched the laptop right out of Daniel Reed's hands. Not asked for it, not requested it, snatched it the way you'd pull something dangerous away from a child who didn't know better. "I don't need your help." Her voice cut through the entire 42nd floor like a blade through silk. Every head turned, every keyboard went silent. And Daniel, the janitor, the nobody, the man holding a mop in a billion-dollar building, just stood there and said nothing. But here's the thing. Nobody in that room knew. The laptop she just grabbed. Daniel had already seen something on that screen that was about to bring her entire empire to its knees. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea who you really were? What if I told you that one janitor's 3-second glance saved a billion-dollar company from total destruction? Drop a comment right now. What city are you watching from? Have you ever been completely underestimated because of how you looked? The morning started the way it always did for Daniel Reed, before the sun. Not because he was ambitious, not because he had somewhere important to be, but because the janitorial shift at Whitmore Technologies started at 5:15 in the morning, and the bus that ran through his neighborhood, the one that actually stopped close enough to walk from, only ran once an hour before 6. So Daniel was always early. He didn't mind. Honestly, early meant the building was quiet. Early meant the marble lobby wasn't full of sharp-suited people talking loudly into their phones, looking straight through him like he was part of the architecture. Early meant he could do his work, do it well, and feel something close to invisible, which in his current life wasn't a bad thing to feel. He woke at 4:45, like he had for 7 years. The apartment was small, thin walls, a radiator that clanked but worked. Lily's backpack sat by the door, already packed for school. He moved quietly through the kitchen, started coffee, pulled eggs from the refrigerator. By the time his daughter shuffled in at 5:15, rubbing sleep from her eyes, 2 plates were waiting on the table. "Morning, sweetheart." Lily dropped into her chair, brown hair tangled, 11 years old and already carrying the particular expression of someone who'd rather be asleep. "Morning, Dad. How's the math homework coming?" "It's fine. Fractions are stupid." "Fractions are useful." "Name one time you've used a fraction this week." Daniel cracked an egg into the pan. "I measured 1/3 of a cup of milk for these eggs about 90 seconds ago." Lily made a face. "That doesn't count." "It absolutely counts." She ate in silence for a minute, then looked up. "Sarah's mom is a lawyer. Katie's dad works at Google." Daniel set his coffee down. "And your dad cleans office buildings." "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant." He sat across from her. "You ashamed of what I do?" "No." Fast. Certain. "I just wonder sometimes why you— I mean, you're smart, Dad. You help me with algebra and I'm in advanced math." Daniel looked at the single photo on the wall. Wedding day. Rachel in white. Him in a suit he'd bought specifically for that afternoon. Both of them 28, and convinced they had the whole world figured out. That photo was 12 years old. Rachel had been gone for 11. "I do this job because it lets me pick you up from school at 4 o'clock every single day." "That's not a small thing, Lily. That's everything." She nodded, pushed eggs around her plate. "I know. You get your stuff ready for school?" "Yeah." "Math test today?" "Tomorrow." "You studied?" "Dad?" "Just asking." At 5:50, he walked her to the bus stop 2 blocks away, watched her climb on, waved until the bus turned the corner. Then he walked 3 blocks in the other direction to catch his own. The number 42 bus was mostly empty. A nurse in scrubs. A construction worker with paint-splattered boots. Daniel sat near the back, watched the city wake up through smudged windows. San Francisco in March, fog rolling off the bay, streetlights still glowing against the gray. He'd lived here 7 years. Before that, a different city, a different life. A life where people knew his name. Where his phone rang with job offers he didn't have time to return. Where Rachel was alive and Lily was 4, and the future looked like something he could build with his hands. He got off at Market Street, walked the last 6 blocks. Whitmore Technologies occupied floors 38 through 44 of a glass tower that caught the sunrise and threw it back at the city like a challenge. Daniel went through the service entrance, signed his name in the logbook, nodded to Marcus behind the security desk. "Morning, Danny." "Morning." Early again. Bus schedule. Marcus, 52, black, ex-military, had worked overnight security for 3 years. He had a daughter at San Jose State and a wife who taught 4th grade. Daniel knew this because Marcus talked while Daniel signed in every morning, and over 3 years, you learned things. "How's Lily doing?" "Good. Math test tomorrow." "She'll crush it. That kid's got brains." Daniel grabbed his cart from the storage room on the ground floor. The left wheel squeaked. Had squeaked for 6 months. He'd submitted 2 maintenance requests to facilities, both ignored. So he'd learned to time the squeak, turn it into a rhythm. Step, push, squeak, step, push, squeak. A metronome for a life lived in hallways nobody else saw. The service elevator groaned upward. Floor 42, executive level. He hated this floor, not because it was harder to clean, though it was, because the kind of people who worked up here had a talent for leaving invisible messes. Coffee rings on glass tables, fingerprints on chrome handles, the faint, chalky outline of stress on every single surface. He hated it because it reminded him of who he used to be. Daniel Reed had not always been a janitor. That was the part of his life he kept folded up and tucked away, like an old letter you don't throw out but can't bring yourself to read. It sat in the back of his chest somewhere, quiet and heavy. And he'd gotten good, really good, at not poking at it. 15 years ago, Daniel Reed had been the kind of man people listened to in rooms exactly like the ones he now cleaned. He'd built systems, not the kind you bought off a shelf, the kind you designed from scratch, from pure logic and instinct and a stubbornness his professors had called problematic and his clients had eventually called invaluable. He'd been 28 years old and consulting for 3 Fortune 500 companies simultaneously when he met Rachel. He'd been 31 and completely in love when she got sick. He'd been 33 and completely lost when she died. And he'd been 34, sitting in a hospital waiting room with a sleeping 5-year-old in his lap and a folder full of medical debt in his hand, when he'd made the decision that had quietly ended his first life and started his second one. He sold the consulting firm. Not because he had to, not immediately anyway. He sold it because Lily needed him present. Not on planes, not on calls at midnight, not staring at a screen while she was learning to read, learning to ride a bike, learning to be a person in a world that had already taken her mother. He could rebuild the career later. That was what he told himself. Later had not arrived yet. The 42nd floor was already humming by the time he stepped off the elevator at 5:52, which was unusual. Normally the floor stayed empty until 7:30, when the assistants arrived to prep conference rooms and boot up workstations. But this morning, there were people everywhere. IT guys rolling server carts, assistants speed-walking with tablets pressed to their chests, 2 men Daniel didn't recognize standing near the main conference room, talking in low voices with the kind of body language that meant something had already gone wrong. He pulled his cart to the side, out of the way, and started on the bathrooms. He kept his head down. That was the other thing he'd learned, maybe the most important thing. Keep your head down. Do your work. Don't make yourself a story someone tells at lunch. He was halfway through the executive washroom when he heard the voice for the first time that morning. Clara Whitmore's voice was not a thing you forgot once you'd heard it. It wasn't loud exactly. It was precise, like a scalpel. Thin, controlled, specifically designed to cut. "What do you mean it's still not working?" Footsteps in the hallway. Fast. "I have 14 people flying in from across the country in 3 hours. Another voice, younger, male, clearly trying very hard not to panic. "Miss Whitmore, we've had our top 2 engineers on it since yesterday evening. The system architecture—" "I don't care about the architecture, Kevin. I care about the presentation that lives on that machine. I care about the board meeting that starts at 9. Can you give me either of those things?" Silence. "That's what I thought. Get me someone who can actually solve a problem." Daniel finished the bathroom, loaded his supplies back onto the cart, wheeled quietly out into the hallway. That was when he saw the laptop. It was sitting on a rolling table outside the main conference room. High-end machine, closed, with 3 IT technicians standing around it like it was a patient they'd lost. One of them had a diagnostic tool plugged into the USB port. Another was on his phone. The third was just staring at it with the specific expression of a man who was updating his resume in his head. Daniel's cart rolled past them. Squeak. He stopped. He didn't mean to. It was involuntary. The way you stop when you smell something burning or hear a sound that doesn't belong. His eyes moved to the screen that the technician had just opened, running a diagnostic readout. He caught maybe 3 seconds of the output before the lid came back down. 3 seconds was enough. He knew what he was looking at. Not the surface-level malfunction, the login failure, the presentation file that wouldn't load, whatever the technicians had been chasing for the last 12 hours. He knew what was underneath that. He recognized it the way you recognize a voice on the phone before the person even says their name. There was something running on that machine that wasn't supposed to be there. Something quiet, something patient, something that had been placed there deliberately by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And the architecture of it, the specific way the process was structured, the methodology behind how it was hiding itself inside the authentication layer, Daniel had seen that before. He'd seen it because he'd built it. 12 years ago. A project called Meridian, a proprietary security framework designed for a defense contractor, something that was supposed to be locked in archives after the acquisition, inaccessible to anyone outside a controlled custody chain. But here it was, on Clara Whitmore's laptop, weaponized. "You got a problem with the cart?" Daniel looked up. The staring technician was looking at him. "No, just the wheel." "Then keep it moving, man. We're working here." Daniel nodded, kept it moving. But his mind was not moving. His mind had stopped completely back at those 3 seconds of diagnostic output, and it was running the numbers, tracing the pathways, following the thread to wherever it led. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't finished yet. He was in the middle of restocking the supply cabinet near the east wing when he heard the crash. Not a physical crash. No glass, no impact. The kind of crash that happens when a person runs out of patience entirely, and the sound of it is a voice. "Are you serious right now?" Clara Whitmore, 30 feet down the hallway, standing over the rolling table with the laptop open in front of her. The 3 technicians had been replaced by 2 different technicians and a man in a suit Daniel didn't recognize. None of them looked like they were having a good morning. "The file is corrupted," one of the new technicians was saying. "We think the initial error caused a cascade. I don't need a post-mortem. I need a solution. We can have the system restored by this afternoon." This afternoon. Her voice went very quiet. That was worse than loud. Daniel had noticed that about her in the months he'd worked this floor. When Clara Whitmore went quiet, you were in real trouble. "The board meeting is in 2 hours and 41 minutes. This afternoon is a different country." She pressed both hands flat on the table and stared at the screen with an intensity that Daniel imagined could have melted the casing if she'd wanted it to. The hallway was very still. That was when Daniel's feet started moving. He would think about this later, lying awake at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling of the small apartment he shared with Lily, and he would never be able to fully explain why. Some part of him, some part that had been sleeping for a long time, had simply woken up. He pushed his cart toward the table. "Excuse me." Nobody heard him, or if they did, they chose not to. He tried again, slightly louder. "Excuse me." One of the technicians turned, registered him, looked back at the laptop. "Not now, buddy. I think I can help." That got a reaction. Not a good one. A ripple of something between amusement and irritation moving through the small group. The suited man raised an eyebrow. One of the technicians actually exhaled a short, humorless laugh, and Clara Whitmore straightened up, turned around, and looked at him. Daniel had been looked at by Clara Whitmore before. The distant automatic gaze of someone noting the presence of a service worker, cataloging it, filing it away under irrelevant. But this look was different. This was the look of someone who had been interrupted. "I'm sorry. Did you just offer to help?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're the janitor?" "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes moved over him. Uniform, name patch, cart with the squeaky wheel, then back to his face. 4 seconds of silence that felt like considerably longer. "I don't need your help." The words landed with the weight of a door closing. Not cruel. Colder than cruel. Something that didn't leave room for a response because it had already decided there wasn't one worth giving. She turned back to the screen. Daniel stood there for a moment. The suited man was looking at him the way you look at something mildly interesting on the sidewalk. The technicians had already redirected their attention back to the laptop. He should have walked away. He knew he should have walked away. Instead, he said quietly, not pushing, just stating a fact. "There's a process running in the background. It's not the file that's corrupted. The file's fine. It's the authentication layer. And if your IT team doesn't find it in the next few minutes, it's going to take down a lot more than the presentation." Nobody moved. Then Clara Whitmore turned around again. And this time, the look on her face was something different entirely. It wasn't the cataloging look. It wasn't the dismissal look. It was the look of someone whose brain had just been forced to recalculate. "What did you just say?" "The authentication layer. Something's riding on it. It's been running for a while, probably since yesterday based on the load I saw in the diagnostic. It's not trying to crash the system, it's trying to look like the system. That's why your engineers can't find it. They're looking for damage, and it hasn't caused any. Not yet." The hallway was so quiet he could hear the HVAC. One of the technicians, the one who had told him to keep moving earlier, was staring at him with an expression that Daniel would have found funny under different circumstances. Clara took one step toward him. "Who are you?" "Daniel Reed. I clean the executive floor." "I know what you do. That's not what I asked." He held her gaze, didn't fill the silence with anything. She looked at him for a long moment, then she looked at the laptop, then back at him. "Show me." He pulled the diagnostic tool from his cart, not the one the technicians had been using, his own. A small USB drive that looked completely unremarkable, the kind you'd buy at any electronics store, except that the software on it was not the kind you bought at any electronics store. He'd built it himself, kept it on him out of habit, the way some people kept a multi-tool or a pocket knife. He plugged it in. The screen shifted. 30 seconds. Nobody spoke. Then one of the technicians said very quietly, "What is that process map?" "Layered." Daniel pointed, not touching the screen. "You can see here. This chain is native. This is your authentication protocol. But this thread right here, this one doesn't belong. It's mimicking the signature of your security framework, but the timestamp is off by about 11 milliseconds. That's not a glitch. That's a placement interval." He heard Clara exhale slowly. He didn't look at her. "Somebody put that there." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "When?" He scrolled through the readout. "Based on the accumulation pattern, I'd estimate between 48 and 60 hours ago." Another silence. A different kind than the ones before. "Can you remove it?" "I can isolate it. I'd want to isolate it before I remove it because if it's connected to anything external and you cut the thread without documenting it, you lose the trail." "What trail?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, met her eyes for the first time in the conversation, as an equal rather than as a man explaining something to someone above him. "Whoever put this here didn't just want access to your system. They wanted to watch it. This isn't a breach. This is reconnaissance. And if you want to know what they were looking for, you need to let me pull the thread before you cut it." Clara Whitmore stared at him. The suited man beside her had gone very still. One of the technicians had his phone out, not to call anyone, to take a photo of the readout on the screen. "Put that away." Clara said it without looking at him. The phone disappeared. She was still looking at Daniel. "You said your name is Daniel." "Yes." "Daniel what?" "Reed." "And you work for facilities?" "Yes." "How long?" 7 months. She nodded slowly, processing. He watched her do it, watched the rapid, disciplined movement of thought behind her eyes, and recognized it distantly as the same thing he used to feel when a problem snapped into focus. "All right, Daniel Reed, isolate the thread." The technicians looked at each other. "Miss Whitmore," the suited man said carefully, "I'm not sure that's—" "Kevin." Her voice was the scalpel again. "Either trust the man who found what your team spent 12 hours missing, or stand somewhere else." Kevin stood somewhere else. Daniel pulled a chair up to the table, sat down, cracked his knuckles once. An old habit. The kind that comes back when you've been away from something and then suddenly aren't. And he started working. He didn't talk while he worked. He never had. Rachel used to joke that you could tell Daniel Reed had found a real problem because he stopped being a person and became something closer to weather. Present, purposeful, impossible to redirect. The process running in the background of Clara Whitmore's laptop was elegant. He'd give whoever built it that much. It wasn't brute force. It wasn't careless. It was the kind of code that took patience and real knowledge of the system it was entering. The kind of knowledge you only got from the inside. He noted that, filed it away, said nothing. 14 minutes after he sat down, he had it isolated, documented, contained in a sandboxed partition that would keep it from communicating with anything external while he completed the analysis. He leaned back in the chair. Done. Clara, who had been standing exactly 3 feet to his right for the entire 14 minutes, leaned forward and looked at the screen. "The presentation file should be accessible now. The authentication layer is clean. Try the login." One of the technicians reached over and typed in the credentials. The screen loaded. The presentation appeared. All 47 slides of it intact, exactly as it had been saved. The technician let out a breath that sounded like a deflating tire. "Okay," said the other technician. "How?" said the third. Clara said nothing. She was reading the documentation Daniel had generated during the isolation. A clean, precise record of the process, the timestamps, the mimicry pattern. Her eyes moved quickly. She was a fast reader. He'd noticed that about her too, on the 42nd floor in the early mornings, the way she consumed information. Not word by word, but in chunks, pulling out the essential structure. She finished reading, looked up. "You documented all of this in 14 minutes. It's not complicated documentation. The process was the complicated part." "Where did you learn to do this?" He paused, 1 beat, then 2. "A long time ago." She studied him. The way a person studies a lock they can't quite figure out. "I want to talk to you after the board meeting. I have a floor to finish, and then I'm on a 4 o'clock pickup." "Pickup?" "My daughter." Her expression shifted, barely noticeable, like a door opening 1 inch before someone remembers to hold it shut. 4 o'clock. "Yes." She nodded once, the way she nodded when she made a decision, not agreeing to something, but recording it. "The meeting ends at noon. My office, 12:15. She picked up the laptop, started walking. Over her shoulder, without turning around. "And Mr. Reed?" He waited. "Don't go anywhere." She rounded the corner. The technicians stood there in the hallway for a moment, looking at each other, and then at Daniel, and then at the spot where Clara had been standing. The suited man, Kevin, cleared his throat, looked at Daniel with an expression that was difficult to read. Something between resentment and reluctant respect. "You want to tell me how a janitor knows more about our system architecture than the people who built it?" Daniel stood up, unplugged his drive, put it back on the cart. Lucky guess. And he pushed the cart back down the hallway, the left wheel squeaking its slow, steady rhythm, while behind him the 42nd floor slowly started breathing again. But inside his chest, something else was moving, something that had been still for a very long time, because the code he'd found on that laptop, the patient, precise architectural code, he'd seen its fingerprints before. Not style, not technique, signature. And the last time he'd seen that signature, It had been in a system he himself had designed, which meant that whoever was inside Whitmore Technologies right now wasn't a stranger. They knew Daniel Reed's work, and that meant, on some level, they knew him. The board meeting started at 9:02. Daniel knew this because he was cleaning the glass partition outside the conference room when he heard the double doors pull shut, and he checked the clock on the wall out of habit. The same habit that had once made him the most reliably punctual consultant in a city full of people who treated other people's time like a renewable resource. He didn't look through the glass. He didn't need to. He kept the squeegee moving in long, even strokes, and he listened to the particular quality of the silence that came from a room full of people who had flown in from across the country and were now waiting to be convinced that everything was fine. He wondered if Clara was going to tell them what she'd found on her laptop. He doubted it. He moved his cart to the next section of glass and kept working. The thing about the 42nd floor, the thing that most people who worked there never noticed because most people who worked there were never required to be invisible, was that it talked. Not loudly, not carelessly, but the walls on that floor were thinner than the architects had probably intended. The ventilation system carried sound in directions that made no logical sense. And the people who walked those hallways were so accustomed to being surrounded only by other important people that they had never developed the reflex of lowering their voices when a service worker was nearby. Daniel had learned more about Whitmore Technologies in 7 months of cleaning than most analysts learned in a year of research. He hadn't done anything with that knowledge. It wasn't his to use, but it lived in him the way all knowledge lived in him, organized, indexed, patient. He was restocking the supply cabinet near the east stairwell when Kevin found him. Kevin's full name, Daniel had learned from overheard conversations, was Kevin Torres. His title was Chief Technology Officer, which meant that the morning's events had been professionally catastrophic for him in a way that was only going to become clearer as the day went on. He walked up to Daniel with his hands in his pockets and the careful, controlled expression of a man who was angry and had decided to be strategic about it instead. "I need to ask you something." "Sure." "When you looked at that diagnostic readout, the one my team was running, how long did you actually see it for?" Daniel turned around. "A few seconds, maybe 3. 3 seconds. Maybe 3. Kevin studied him. "And from 3 seconds of a diagnostic readout, you identified an embedded process, characterized its behavior, estimated its installation window, and determined that it was reconnaissance rather than an active breach." "Yes. From 3 seconds. The pattern was distinctive. Once you know what that kind of embedding looks like, it's not hard to recognize." "Once you know what it looks like?" Kevin repeated it the way a prosecutor repeats something back to a witness, not to clarify but to mark it. "And where exactly did you learn what it looks like?" Daniel held his gaze. "I told you. Lucky guess." "Right." Kevin's jaw tightened. "Here's my problem with that, Daniel. I've been in cybersecurity for 19 years. I have a team of 8 engineers, all of them certified, most of them with graduate degrees. None of them caught what you caught. So either we're all very bad at our jobs, or you're very good at yours. And I'd like to know which one it is." "Could be both." Kevin didn't appreciate that. "I'm going to find out who you are. I'm going to look you up. I'm going to call your references, and I'm going to find out why a man with whatever you're carrying around in your head is pushing a cart on the 42nd floor." "That's your right." "Yeah, it is." He started to walk away, then stopped, turned back. "The process you isolated, you said whoever built it knew the system architecture." "Yes." "Our system architecture isn't public. It's not documented outside of internal files. The only people who have access to the structural framework are people who work here or people who worked here." Daniel said nothing. "So you understand why I'm having a very strange morning." "I understand." Kevin looked at him for one more moment. Then he walked away. The sound of his footsteps on the marble faded down the hallway. Daniel turned back to the supply cabinet and stood there for a moment with his hand resting on the shelf. Not moving, just breathing. Because Kevin wasn't wrong. The architecture knowledge wasn't the part that was keeping Daniel's mind occupied, though. He'd already worked that angle. There were ways in from the outside if you were patient and skilled enough. Ways to map a system structure without ever having touched it directly. That was possible. Difficult, but possible. What wasn't possible, what he couldn't explain away, was the signature. Code had a fingerprint the way handwriting had a fingerprint. The structure of logic chains, the specific way a programmer solved the micro decisions, whether to use recursion or iteration, how to handle the edge cases, where to place the redundancies, all of it accumulated into something that was, if you had enough experience reading it, as identifiable as a face. And the fingerprint on that embedded process was one Daniel had spent years living inside of. It was his own, not his current self's work. He hadn't written a line of professional code in nearly a decade, but the methodology, the specific architecture of the logic, it was built on a framework he had designed. A proprietary framework that he had created for a contract client in 2011 and that had never been published, never been open-sourced, never been shared beyond the walls of that one specific project. A project that had been acquired, along with everything in it, by a company that no longer existed under its original name. He needed to make a call. He looked at his watch. The board meeting would run until at least 11:30. He had time. He wheeled his cart to the service corridor, tucked it against the wall, and pulled out his phone. The number he needed wasn't saved. He'd deleted it 18 months ago when he decided that the previous chapter of his life was finished and he was going to stop leaving doors open to it. He dialed it from memory. Which was the thing about a memory like his. You could delete the contact, but you couldn't delete the number. Some things just lived in you permanently, whether you wanted them to or not. It rang 4 times. Then a voice, cautious. "Yeah?" "It's Daniel." A pause. "Daniel Reed?" "Yeah." Another pause. Longer. "It's been a while." "I know. I need to ask you something about the Meridian project." The name landed in the silence like a stone in still water. "That's not a conversation for a phone." "I know. But I need a yes or no. The framework, our framework, is it still locked up? Has it been licensed to anyone? Sold, transferred, anything?" The voice on the other end was quiet for so long that Daniel thought the call might have dropped. "Not that I know of. After the acquisition it was supposed to be archived, off limits. Why?" "Because I just found it running inside someone else's system, and it wasn't invited." Another long silence. "Who?" "Whitmore Technologies. Clara Whitmore's company. You know her?" "I know of her." The voice shifted, a subtle change in texture, something careful entering it. "Daniel, that framework wasn't just archived. After the acquisition, there was a whole chain of custody review. The only people who had access to the original source code were you, me, and 3 others. I know. Which means one of us. I know." The service corridor was very still. Somewhere above him, on the other side of the wall, the board meeting was happening. Clara standing at the front of the room with the presentation he'd rescued, delivering it with the composure she'd maintained through everything that morning. And underneath all of it, quiet and patient and waiting, the thing he'd isolated was sitting in its sandboxed partition. "I need the access logs, whatever you can pull from the acquisition records. Who touched the framework after the handover? Any usage events? Any export records? Anything. I don't know if I can still get those. Can you try?" The voice hesitated. "Daniel, you're a janitor now. This isn't your problem anymore. Someone used our work to break into a company's system. Used it specifically, deliberately. That makes it mine." A long breath on the other end of the line. "I'll see what I can do. Give me a few hours." "I've got until 4. "Why 4? "Lily's pickup." "Right." The voice softened just slightly. "How is she?" "She's good. She's great. She made the honor roll." "That's good, man. That's really good." "Yeah. Call me when you have something." He hung up, put the phone back in his pocket, looked down the service corridor at nothing in particular. Then he went back to his cart and finished cleaning the 42nd floor. The board meeting ended at 11:47. He knew this because he was in the copy room when he heard the double doors open, and he heard the particular cadence of the conversation that flows out of a successful meeting. Not jubilant, but eased. The way people talk when they've been tense for hours and the tension has been properly resolved. He heard Clara's voice briefly. 2 words to someone, sharp and directive, and then the sound of her heels on the floor moving away. He checked his watch. 12:08. He had 7 minutes. He found a bathroom, washed his hands, looked at himself in the mirror for a moment. He was 53 years old. He looked it. Not badly, not broken down, but undeniably it. The gray at his temples had been coming in since he was 45. The lines around his eyes were the kind that came from squinting at screens in the dark, and from years of not sleeping enough, and from the specific ongoing work of raising a child alone. He hadn't worn a suit in 4 years. He was wearing his facility's uniform, dark gray, his name stitched on the pocket. He thought about changing. He didn't have anything to change into. He went to Clara Whitmore's office at 12:15 exactly. Her assistant, a young woman named Priya, who had in 7 months never spoken directly to Daniel beyond a brief nod of acknowledgement, looked up when he appeared in the doorway. Something moved across her face. Not unkindness, more like the mild confusion of a person whose world has just quietly rearranged itself. "Mr. Reed, she's expecting you." He'd never been called Mr. Reed on the 42nd floor. He knocked on the open office door. Clara was at her desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a pen in her hand that she set down when she looked up. The presentation was on the screen behind her, closed now. Done. Purpose served. The window behind her desk looked out over a city that didn't care about any of this. "Sit down." He sat. The chair across from her desk was the kind of chair designed to make you feel like you belonged in the room. He noticed that. He also noticed that she was looking at him differently than she had in the hallway. Less reactive, more considered. She'd had 3 hours to think about him, and she'd used them. "How was the meeting?" She looked at him for a beat. "Fine. The presentation was fine. They approved the funding for the next development cycle." She said it efficiently, the way you close a completed task. "I want to talk about the other thing." "Okay." "The process you isolated. You said you'd want to pull the thread before cutting it." "Yes." "Have you started that?" "Not yet. I wanted your authorization before I went further." She leaned back in her chair. "You wanted my authorization." "It's your system. I'm not going to go deeper into it without your knowledge." Her expression shifted. That door opening an inch thing again. Most people who know what they're doing don't ask permission. They just do it. Most people who know what they're doing get themselves into trouble that way. She looked at him steadily. "Tell me who you are. The real version." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, what did Kevin tell you?" "Kevin told me he ran your background check and came up with a work history that starts 7 years ago at a building management company in Cincinnati, and before that is essentially a wall." She tilted her head. "Which means either you're very careful or someone was very careful on your behalf." "The first one." "Why?" He looked at his hands for a moment, then at her. "I had a consulting firm. Network security architecture. I built systems for enterprise clients. Mostly financial sector, some government adjacent. We were small, but we were good. And by 2009 we had a reputation." He said all of this evenly, not performing anything, just stating it. "My wife got sick in 2010. She died in 2012. When she died, I had a 5-year-old daughter and a grief that I didn't know what to do with. And I decided that the most important thing I could do was be present for my kid. So I sold the firm, stepped back from the industry, and spent the next several years being a father." Clara said nothing. She was listening with the full contact attention she gave to things that mattered. "The work history wall is because when I stepped back, I stepped all the way back. New city, fresh start. The consulting identity was tied to a professional name I'd built up. I didn't want to be found, not for work reasons, just... He stopped, picked the right words. I needed a clean line between who I was and who I was becoming. And who you were becoming was a janitor, not unkindly. Who I was becoming was Lily's dad. The job was just the job that let me do that on the hours I needed. A long silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that happens when two people are both thinking clearly and don't need to fill the air. The framework on your system, the architecture of the embedded process. I recognized it this morning because I built it. Clara went very still. Not the process itself, the framework it's built on. It's a proprietary methodology that I developed for a specific client project in 2011. It was never published. It was supposed to be archived after the acquisition. Which acquisition? The client company was acquired by a larger firm in 2013. Everything we built for them was supposed to be locked, off limits, accessible to no one outside of a controlled custody chain. Supposed to be? Yes. She pulled a legal pad toward her and wrote something. You said whoever built it knew the architecture from the inside, which means someone with access to that custody chain, or someone who got access to it without authorization. He let that land. I have someone looking into the access logs right now. Someone? A former colleague, someone I trust. She looked at him carefully. You started investigating this on your own. I started making a phone call. I haven't touched your system again. But you want to. He held her gaze. There's more in there. The process is isolated, but it's not inert. It's still running. It's just contained. Whatever it was collecting before I sandboxed it, that data is still somewhere, and whoever put it there is going to notice eventually that it stopped reporting back. How long until they notice depends on how often they were checking. Could be hours, could be less. Clara set the pen down, looked at the ceiling briefly, a gesture he was starting to recognize as her version of a thinking pause. Then she looked back at him. My board just approved $180 million for the next development cycle. We start implementation in 30 days. The architecture for that implementation, the structural plans, the security framework, the partner network, all of it lives on systems connected to this one. She said it flatly, without drama, just information. If someone is mapping our infrastructure, they're not doing it for fun. No, they're doing it because in 30 days, when you start moving money and data and access credentials through that network, they want to be inside it already, watching, waiting. That's what the evidence suggests. She stood up, walked to the window, stood there for a moment with her back to him, not dismissing him, just processing. He watched the set of her shoulders, the particular stillness of someone running through very large numbers very fast. My IT team, Kevin's team, can they handle this? Daniel considered the question seriously. They're good engineers, but they spent 12 hours on the surface of this problem and didn't see it. The person who built this process knew what they were doing. It's going to take someone who thinks the same way they do. Someone like you. Yes. She turned around. And in exchange for that, what do you want? He shook his head slightly. I'm not asking for anything. That's not how this works. In my experience, when someone says they don't want anything, it means they haven't decided what they want yet. So I'm asking you directly, and I'd like a direct answer. He looked at her. He thought about Lily, about the apartment with the thin walls and the bus that ran once an hour before 6 in the morning, about the honor roll certificate on the refrigerator that he'd taped up with 3 pieces of masking tape because he'd run out of magnets, about the old laptop in his cart downstairs in the service corridor because he hadn't been able to bring himself to completely walk away from the thing he was best at. I want to finish the job. That's all. I want to find out what's in your system, who put it there, and why. And then I want to make sure they can't do it again. She looked at him for a long time. Why? It was a genuine question, Not a challenge, not a test. Real curiosity. He thought about the code signature, about the framework that lived in his hands before it lived anywhere else, about the fact that someone had taken something he built and used it to do something he never intended. Because it's mine. What they used to get in here, the methodology, the architecture, I built that, and nobody asked me if it was okay to use it this way. Clara nodded once, the recording a decision nod. You'll work directly with me, not Kevin, not his team, not until I decide otherwise. You'll have access to whatever systems you need. You'll check in with me every 2 hours, and you'll tell me everything you find, in plain language, as you find it. She paused. And you'll be here tomorrow morning. I'm on facility schedule. I'll talk to Gary. Gary's not going to love that. Gary doesn't have to love it. He just has to agree to it. She picked up the pen again. And Mr. Reed, you said 4 o'clock. Your daughter? Yes. What time does her school start? He paused. 8:15. Then be here at 8:30 and go get your daughter at 4. Whatever you're doing in between, do it on my system, with my resources, and do it fast. She looked directly at him, because if they notice the process has gone quiet, the clock starts. I know. Do you need anything right now? Equipment, access, credentials? He thought for a moment. I need access to your server architecture maps, full topology, and I need the maintenance logs for the last 90 days. Not IT maintenance, physical maintenance. Who's been in the server rooms? Access card records. She wrote it down. You'll have them in an hour. He stood up. She was already back on the phone before he reached the door. Priya, I need the physical access logs for the data center. Last 90 days. And get Gary from facilities on the phone. Daniel walked back down the hallway toward the service corridor. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from the number he'd called that morning. No name attached. Found something in the logs. You're not going to like it. Call me. He didn't call right away. He stood for a moment by the window at the end of the corridor, looking out at the city the way Clara had. And he thought about how the thing you walk away from never fully lets you go. He thought about how he'd told himself for 7 years that this part of his life was over. He thought about Lily at school right now, drawing something in the margins of her notebook the way she always did, not knowing that her father was standing on the 42nd floor of a building he cleaned for a living, holding a thread that led somewhere he couldn't fully see yet. He pulled out his phone and made the call. Tell me. The voice on the other end took a breath. The kind of breath that precedes something you've been sitting with for too long and have finally decided to say out loud. I pulled the access logs from the acquisition archive, the Meridian handover records. There were 5 people on the authorized custody chain after the deal closed. You, me, Patterson, Salz, and Webb. You walked away clean. We know that. I've been out of the industry for 3 years. You know that. Patterson died in 2019. Which leaves 2 names, Salz or Webb. I thought so too. So I went further back, pulled the original framework export records, looking for any unauthorized copies, any instances where the source code was accessed outside of normal workflow. And I found something. Another pause. Someone accessed the core framework files 11 months after the acquisition closed. Single access event, 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. That's not a scheduled access. No, it's not. And it wasn't logged under any of the 5 authorized names. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then who? That's the part you're not going to like. The access credential used was yours. The corridor went very still around him. That's not possible. I was already out by then. I hadn't touched anything in that system since the handover review. I physically handed over my credentials at the closing meeting. I watched them revoke the access in real time. I know that too, which means someone either cloned your credential before the handover or someone had access to the revocation records and found a window before the system fully processed the removal. A pause. Either way, whoever accessed those files wanted it to look like you. Daniel put his back against the wall. His mind was moving very fast and very quietly, the way it did when a problem opened up into something larger than it had appeared from the outside. Is the access log auditable? If someone looked at it now, would they see my name on it? Yes. So if this gets investigated officially, legally, the first thing anyone would find is that Daniel Reed accessed the Meridian framework 11 months post-acquisition, and Daniel Reed is currently working inside Whitmore Technologies. He let that settle, felt the full weight of it. They set me up, not with anger, just recognition. Looks like it. And Daniel, they didn't set you up after the fact. This was 11 months post-acquisition. That's years ago. Whoever did this, they've been building this frame around you for a long time. Which means they knew even then that eventually I'd end up somewhere near this system. Or they needed a fall guy, and you were the most convenient option. Someone who'd walked away from the industry, gone quiet, no institutional protection. The voice lowered. Either way, you need to be careful. If this thing blows open and you're standing inside Whitmore Technologies with your hands on their network, I know. Does the CEO know who you are? Really? No. I told her some of it this morning. You need to tell her the rest of it, all of it, before Kevin runs your name through anything official and it comes back wrong. Daniel pushed off the wall and started moving back toward the service corridor. How solid is your source on the access logs? I pulled them directly from the acquisition firm's retained records. They're the originals. Not copies, not summaries, but I can't hold them indefinitely and I can't share them officially without creating exposure for myself. I need them in digital form, anything you can send securely. I can do that. Give me an hour. A hesitation. Daniel, this is not a small thing you're walking into. I know. Lily needs her father present, not wrapped up in a federal investigation. I know that too. And his voice was even, but his chest was tight with something he wasn't going to name right now because naming it would slow him down, and he couldn't afford slow. Send me the logs. He hung up, stood in the service corridor for 3 full seconds. Then he went to find Kevin. Kevin wasn't hard to find. He was in the IT bullpen on the 42nd floor, standing over a workstation with 2 of his engineers, reviewing something on the monitor with the posture of a man who had been professionally embarrassed and was working very hard to unembarrass himself before anyone important noticed. He saw Daniel coming and straightened up. I need 5 minutes. Kevin looked at his engineers. They suddenly found their monitors very interesting. My office. Kevin's office was a glass box on the interior wall of the bullpen, visible from all sides, which Daniel suspected was either a design oversight or a deliberate symbol of the kind of transparent leadership style that looked good in company literature and was actually just uncomfortable in practice. Kevin closed the door behind them and stood with his arms crossed. You went to see Clara. She asked me to. And she asked me to look deeper into the system. Kevin's jaw tightened. Into my system. Into the company's system. I understand that's uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Kevin repeated it. The word came out clipped and precise. You want to know what's uncomfortable? Uncomfortable is finding out that the man who embarrassed my team this morning has a work history that effectively starts in 2016 and a background that nobody can verify. He took a step forward. I ran your name through our standard security clearance check. You know what came back? Probably not much. Nothing meaningful. So I went further. I have resources that go further. And I found something interesting. He paused for effect. There's a name that comes up in archived records from a 2013 corporate acquisition, a cybersecurity consultant named Daniel Reed, who was part of the development team for something called the Meridian Project. Daniel held his expression steady. I'm still pulling that thread, but here's what I know right now. The Meridian framework was acquired as proprietary intellectual property. It was supposed to be secured and archived, and one of its original developers is currently standing in my office. He let that sit. You want to explain to me why I shouldn't be treating you as a person of interest? Because I found the breach, not caused it. People who set fires sometimes report them too. It keeps them close to the investigation. That's true. It also means sometimes the person who finds the fire is the person who knows the most about how fires work. He kept his voice level. Kevin, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to set aside whatever you're feeling about this morning and actually hear it. Kevin said nothing, but he was listening. The framework on your system, the architecture used to build that embedded process, it was built from Meridian code. I recognized it this morning because I wrote the original methodology, but I didn't put it there. Someone accessed the Meridian source files years ago using credentials that had my name on them. Credentials that should have been revoked. They've been building a frame around me. And if this thing becomes an official investigation, the first name in the access logs is mine. He paused, which means I need to pull the full thread before anyone pulls it for me. And I need to do it fast, because whoever put that process in your system is going to notice that it's gone quiet. And when they do, they're going to move. Kevin stared at him for a long moment. His arms were still crossed, but the angle of them had shifted. No longer defensive. More like a man physically holding his own reaction in place while he decided what to do with it. You're telling me you're being set up? Yes. And you're asking me to help you instead of report you. I'm asking you to give me enough time to show you the access logs. I have someone sending them now. The original records from the acquisition firm. My name is in there, but when you look at the timestamp and the metadata, you'll see it doesn't hold up. The access happened 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, more than a year after I'd been out of the industry. No VPN record, no device signature that matches anything in my history. Kevin uncrossed his arms slowly. How long until you get those logs? An hour? And you're already working the system? Clara gave you access? Not yet. I wanted to have this conversation first. Kevin looked at him with an expression that was harder to read now. Not warm, not hostile, but recalibrated somehow, like a compass that had been shaken and was finding north again. Why? You have Clara's authorization. You don't need mine. Because when this is done, you're going to be responsible for this company's security infrastructure going forward, and you can't do that job right if you think I'm the enemy. He held Kevin's gaze. I'm not the enemy. The silence in the glass box lasted a long time. Show me the logs when they arrive. And until then, you stay in the system Clara authorized, and you don't go further without clearing it with me first. Whatever she told you, she and I will sort out the jurisdictional question later. Right now, we have the same problem. Agreed. Daniel went to work. Clara had arranged a workstation for him in a small conference room off the main hallway. Not the IT bullpen, not a visible public space, just a room with a table, a monitor, and a door that closed. Priya had left an access credential card on the table and a handwritten note that said in neat, blocky letters, "Server topology files loaded. Maintenance logs attached. Call if you need anything." Below that, a 4-digit extension. He sat down, plugged in his drive, and let himself think for a moment before he started. The process he'd isolated that morning was sitting in its sandbox, still running its internal cycles, still generating the pattern of activity that made it look, to its own internal logic, like it was connected and functioning normally. It didn't know it was cut off. That was the elegance of a good sandbox. It didn't silence the process. It created a convincing enough illusion that the process kept behaving naturally, kept generating data, kept revealing itself. He opened the process documentation he'd compiled that morning and read through it again from the beginning. He was looking for the thing he'd been too focused to look for in the urgency of the initial isolation. Not what the process was doing, but how it had been delivered. The delivery method was the fingerprint the builder could never fully erase. It took him 40 minutes to find it. The process had been introduced through a physical access point, not a remote intrusion, not a phishing delivery, not a supply chain attack. Someone had physically connected a device to a node in the server infrastructure, on site, in the building, which meant the physical maintenance logs weren't just relevant, they were the map. He pulled them up. 90 days of access records for the data center on the 38th floor. 47 entries. He started reading. Most of them were routine. Scheduled maintenance windows, cooling system checks, hardware replacement. They had timestamps, badge IDs, work order numbers. He cross-referenced against the internal employee directory, against the facility's contractor list. 38 entries were clean. 7 were interesting. One was a problem. The problem entry was 63 days ago. A facilities contractor logged into the data center at 7:42 in the evening, outside of a scheduled maintenance window, with a work order that had been retroactively entered into the system 20 minutes after the badge swipe. The badge ID belonged to a third-party HVAC contractor. The name on the contractor record was Mitchell Cruz. He looked up the contractor company. It existed, a small HVAC maintenance firm out of Newark. He looked up Mitchell Cruz. Also existed. A real employee, real work history, real contractor relationship with Whitmore Technologies going back 4 years. He called the contractor company's main number. "Hi, this is David Monroe from Whitmore Technologies Facilities Management. I'm doing a routine reconciliation of our contractor log, and I have a work entry for one of your techs. Mitchell Cruz, evening of..." He gave the date. "Can you verify that visit was scheduled?" A pause. Typing sounds. "Mr. Cruz was out on medical leave that week. He had knee surgery. He definitely wasn't on any job sites." "So this wasn't one of your team members?" "No, sir. If there's a log entry with his badge, I'd be concerned about that. His credentials should have been on hold." "Thank you. I'll look into it." He hung up, sat back. Someone had used a real contractor's badge, either stolen, cloned, or accessed through the contractor company's credential system. To walk into the data center 63 days ago and physically introduce the embedded process into the server infrastructure. They'd submitted a retroactive work order to cover the visit. They'd chosen an evening when the floor was minimally staffed, and they'd used an HVAC tech's credentials because HVAC contractors had physical access to server rooms for environmental maintenance, and nobody thought twice about them. This was not improvised. This was months of preparation. He was writing up the finding when his phone buzzed. The logs from his contact had arrived. A compressed file, encrypted, with a separate message containing the decryption key. He opened them on his personal drive, not the workstation, and read through them carefully. The access event was exactly as described. 3:14 in the morning, 11 months post-acquisition. His credential ID now revoked, used to access the Meridian Framework source files. Duration 22 minutes. Files accessed, core logic architecture, authentication methodology, the proprietary embedding framework he'd spent 3 months building. The metadata was wrong in exactly the way he'd known it would be. The device signature, the digital fingerprint of the machine used to access the files, didn't match any hardware he'd ever owned, used, or been associated with. The geographic IP origin placed the access in a city he'd never lived in or visited during that period. And the behavioral pattern of the file access, the sequence in which the files were opened, the navigation pattern through the directory, was nothing like his own. Someone had used his credential, but they hadn't been able to fake being him. He compiled everything into a single document, the process documentation, the contractor log anomaly, the access logs with his analysis of the metadata inconsistencies. And he was about to send it to Clara when the conference room door opened. It wasn't Kevin. It wasn't Priya. It was a man he'd never seen on the 42nd floor before. Mid-50s, well-dressed in the understated way of someone who'd been told at some point that wealth didn't need to announce itself. Silver hair, sharp eyes, the kind of posture that came from decades of being the most important person in rooms. He was carrying a cup of coffee and wearing an expression of relaxed authority, like a man who had never once had to ask permission to go anywhere. "You must be the janitor." Daniel looked at him. "And you are?" "Richard Hale. I'm on the board. I flew in this morning for the meeting." He didn't offer a hand, just sat down in the chair across from Daniel with the ease of someone who sat wherever they wanted. "Clara tells me you had an interesting morning. She told you about me. She mentioned there was a situation that had been handled." He tilted his head. I like to understand situations. He nodded toward the screen. Find anything useful? Daniel closed the documentation on the workstation. Not quickly, just calmly. The way you close something when you've decided you're done sharing it. I'm still working through it. Hale smiled. It was a comfortable smile. The smile of a man who was used to people being slightly nervous around him and found it neither threatening nor bothersome. I've been on the Whitmore board for 6 years. Watched this company grow from a mid-sized security firm into what it is now. Clara's exceptional at what she does, but she has a tendency, and I say this with real respect, to trust the person in front of her when they've demonstrated competence without fully accounting for the question of motive. Daniel said nothing. So I like to ask about motive. What brings a man with your apparent capabilities to a janitorial position in a building like this? Needed a job with specific hours. For your daughter? Yes. That's admirable. Hale said it without irony, but also without warmth. The way you call something admirable when you respect the fact without being moved by it. What's her name? Daniel looked at him steadily. That's not information I share at work. Something shifted in Hale's expression, almost imperceptible. The comfortable smile stayed, but something behind the eyes recalibrated. The way it had with Clara earlier, except this was different. Clara's recalibration had been respect. This was something closer to reassessment. Fair enough. Hale stood, picked up his coffee. I won't keep you from your work, Mr. Reed. I just wanted to put a face to the story. He moved toward the door, then paused with one hand on the frame. The way people paused in doorways when they had one more thing to say that they wanted to seem casual. One thing. Since you're looking at our systems, we had a third-party security audit about 8 months ago, external firm. The lead auditor had access to our full server topology for about 3 weeks. I always thought that was a longer access window than necessary, but Clara overruled my concern. He paused just a beat. Might be worth looking at. He left. Daniel sat with that for a moment. Then he opened a new window and typed in a search. Whitmore Technologies, third-party security audit, external firm, 8 months ago. The firm's name came back in a press release from a trade publication, a routine announcement of the engagement, the kind of corporate transparency item that lived on a company's PR page and nobody ever read. The firm was called Arlen Security Group, based in Chicago, founded in 2018. He searched for the founders. The first name that came up was James Webb, the same James Webb who had been on the authorized custody chain for the Meridian Framework acquisition. Daniel's hands went still on the keyboard. Webb had run the security audit. Webb had been inside Whitmore Technologies' full server topology for 3 weeks 8 months ago. Webb had had access to the physical data center, and Webb was one of only 4 living people with knowledge of the Meridian Framework. The framework whose signature was now sitting on Clara Whitmore's network, wearing Daniel's stolen credentials like a mask. He picked up his phone and called Clara directly. She picked up on the second ring. What did you find? Enough. I need you to do something right now, before you do anything else. Your third-party security audit 8 months ago, the firm that ran it. I need to know if James Webb had unsupervised access to your data center during that engagement. A pause. How do you know that name? Because I worked with him 12 years ago, and his company's fingerprints are on everything I've been looking at this morning. He stood up from the workstation. Clara, Richard Hale just came to see me. The silence on the other end was brief, but absolute. He's not supposed to know you're here. I know. Who told him? That's what I'd like to know. And I'd like to know it before he has another conversation with someone I haven't talked to yet. He could hear her breathing, steady and controlled, the way she controlled everything. I'll pull the audit access records. Come to my office in 20 minutes. I'll be there. He hung up, looked at the closed door of the conference room, thought about what Hale had said. Clara has a tendency to trust the person in front of her when they've demonstrated competence, without fully accounting for the question of motive. It was the kind of thing you said to plant a seed. The kind of thing you said when you wanted someone to look at the person helping them and start wondering instead of trusting. He thought about the frame that had been built around his name in the access logs. He thought about Webb's audit 8 months ago. He thought about the fact that this intrusion, patient, architectural, years in the making, had required someone who understood not just how to build the process, but how to predict where Daniel Reed would eventually land. How to make sure that when the process was discovered, his name would be the one attached to its history. That level of knowledge wasn't research, that was personal. He picked up his drive, put it in his pocket, and walked to the window at the end of the conference room. Below him, the city moved in its ordinary way. Cars and pedestrians and the distant, indifferent geometry of other buildings. He checked the time. 2:47 in the afternoon. He had 1 hour and 13 minutes before Lily's pickup. He thought about her the way he always did when the world got complicated. Not as an escape from the complication, but as the reason to move through it. She was 11 years old, and she made the honor roll, and she drew in the margins of her notebooks, and she had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness. And she was waiting for him at 4 o'clock, the way she had been waiting for him at 4 o'clock every school day for the last 6 years. He would be there. But first, he had 20 minutes and a name and a thread that was finally starting to show him where it led. He went to find Clara. Clara was already on her feet when Daniel walked through the door. She had the audit access records on her screen, a spreadsheet pulled from the facilities management system, time-stamped entries going back 8 months, and she was reading them with the focused intensity of someone who had already found something and was now deciding what to do about it. She looked up when he entered. Whatever she saw in his face confirmed whatever she was already thinking. "Sit down." He sat. She turned the screen toward him. James Webb, lead auditor, Arlen Security Group. 3-week engagement beginning 8 months and 4 days ago. Full topology access. Level 4 data center clearance. She tapped the screen. And 11 individual after-hours entries to the physical data center between 7 p.m. and midnight. 11 times over 3 weeks. Unsupervised? Our protocol for third-party auditors requires a Whitmore escort during physical data center access. Her voice was controlled. Too controlled. The kind of control that takes effort. Every one of those 11 entries has an escort badge logged alongside Webb's. The escort ID belongs to a senior facilities coordinator named Paul Garrett. She paused. Paul Garrett resigned 4 months ago. He's currently uncontactable at his last known address. Daniel absorbed that. Webb didn't just have access. He had a partner on the inside. It looks that way. She pulled the screen back. Tell me how you know Webb. We worked together on the Meridian project. He was one of 5 people on the authorized custody chain when the framework was acquired. He had legitimate access to the source code until the handover review closed. He looked at her directly. And as of this morning, I know that someone used my old credential to access the Meridian source files about a year after the acquisition. The metadata doesn't hold up. Wrong device signature, wrong IP origin. But on paper, my name is in the logs. Clara was quiet for a moment. He set you up. He set up a contingency. If this breach was ever discovered and traced back to the Meridian framework, the first name in the access records is mine. I'm already inside your building. I've already had my hands on your system. He let her draw the geometry of it herself, because Clara Whitmore didn't need things explained to her twice. She drew it. He watched her do it, watched her eyes move through the logic. The frame only works if you're the one who found it. If someone else had found the breach, my IT team, an external investigator, your presence in the building and your name in the Meridian logs would have been a very compelling story. Yes, but I found it, and I came directly to you, which wasn't in the plan. I don't think Webb expected a janitor to identify his framework in a 3-second glance at a diagnostic readout. Her face shifted, not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. It disappeared quickly. Richard Hale came to see you. He came to plant doubt. He told me you trust people who demonstrate competence without accounting for motive. He mentioned the audit, Webb's access window. said it might be worth looking at. He watched her. That last part was either genuinely trying to help or testing whether I'd chase that thread and expose myself in the process. Which do you think? I don't know yet. But the fact that he knew I was in that conference room and knew enough about this morning to characterize what I was doing, that came from somewhere. Someone told him, and the only people who knew I was working that room were you, Kevin, and Priya. Clara's expression didn't change. I didn't tell him. I know. And Priya has been with me for 4 years. She's not a variable. That leaves Kevin. The silence that followed was careful. Clara walked to the window, stood there with her arms crossed. Not the defensive cross, the thinking cross. The one where she was holding herself together while she ran the numbers. Kevin didn't know about Webb. He didn't know about the Meridian connection. I didn't tell him the details of our conversation. He didn't need to know about Webb to tell Hale there was a consultant in the conference room. All it took was one sentence. Clara has someone looking at the system. That's enough for Hale to go investigating on his own. Why would Kevin tell Hale anything? I don't know. Maybe he didn't mean to. Maybe it was a casual comment in the elevator after the board meeting. Maybe it was something else. He paused. Or maybe Kevin's been uncomfortable since this morning for reasons that go beyond professional embarrassment, and he wanted someone with more authority than himself to take a look. Clara turned around. You don't trust him. I don't distrust him. I just don't have enough information yet. He leaned forward. Clara, here's what I know with confidence right now. Webb used the audit to physically place the embedded process in your infrastructure. 11 after-hours visits, an inside escort, enough access to do it carefully and cleanly. He built it on Meridian architecture so that if it was ever traced, it would trace back to me. He left my credential in the access logs as insurance, and the process has been running for 63 days. Quietly mapping your system. Waiting. Waiting for what? The development cycle. The $180 million you announced this morning. Your board-approved implementation in 30 days. Webb, or whoever Webb is working for, wants to be sitting inside your network when that money starts moving. When the access credentials for the partner network get generated, when the financial architecture goes live. Clara looked at him for a long moment. You said whoever Webb is working for. Webb is good, but this operation is bigger than Webb. The level of preparation, the patience, the resources to run a legitimate security consulting firm as a cover for an inside job. This is funded. This is directed. He met her eyes. Webb is the instrument. There's a hand holding him. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Hale. I don't have evidence of that yet, but you think it. I think Richard Hale has been on your board for 6 years. I think he was the one who expressed concern about the audit access window, which either means he was genuinely worried or he's careful enough to put his objection on record before the thing he enabled gets discovered. He paused. I think he came to see me specifically to test how much I knew and to put doubt in my mind about you. And I think a man who sits on the board of a company doesn't usually walk down to a conference room to personally interview a janitor unless the janitor is relevant to something he cares about very much. Clara sat down. Not the controlled, deliberate motion of a CEO taking command of a room. Just a person sitting down because the weight of what she was carrying had become something she needed to rest with for a moment. She put both hands flat on the desk and looked at them. 6 years. He's been on this board for 6 years. I know. He was on the selection committee when we hired our last 2 department heads. He had input into the audit firm selection. She said it quietly, not to Daniel, but to herself, running the inventory of access. He was in the room for every major strategic discussion we've had. I know. She looked up. Can you prove it? Not yet. But the process is still running. It's still generating data in the sandbox. If I let it run long enough, it will eventually try to phone home, to push whatever it's collected to an external receiver. That receiver is an IP address, and that IP address is traceable. He kept his voice steady. I need a few more hours with the system, and I need it to look from the outside like nothing has changed. meaning the process can't appear to have been isolated. If Webb or whoever is monitoring it sees that it's been contained, they'll cut the connection and you lose the thread. I need the sandbox to stay invisible. The process has to keep behaving like it's still running normally inside your system. Can you do that? I already did it this morning. The question is how long the illusion holds. He checked his watch. 3:17. I need to make a call and then I need to be somewhere at 4. Your daughter. Yes. He stood. I'll be back by 5:30. If anything moves on the system before I'm back, if the process changes behavior in any way, call me immediately. I'll have Kevin monitor it. He hesitated. I know, but I can't freeze him out entirely. If he's connected to this, pulling him off will signal something's wrong. If he's not connected to this, I need him functional. She looked at Daniel with a directness that was the thing he'd come to recognize as simply her. Not aggressive, just utterly without pretense. I've been running this company for 11 years. I know how to keep information compartmentalized. Tell him the process is stable and contained. Don't tell him you're waiting for it to move. Understood. She picked up a pen, set it back down. Daniel, he stopped. I owe you an apology. This morning, the way I spoke to you. He was quiet for a moment. You were under pressure. That's not an excuse. I looked at you, and I saw your job title, and I reacted to that instead of to you. That was wrong. He looked at her for a moment. Then, thank you. She nodded. Go get your daughter. He went. The bus that ran through his neighborhood took 41 minutes to reach the school. He'd made this calculation so many times that it was automatic now, the way a pilot knows the numbers for a route they've flown 1,000 times. He was at the bus stop at 3:22. He boarded at 3:26. He'd be at the school at 4:07, which was 7 minutes late, which meant Lily would be standing outside the front entrance with her backpack on both shoulders and her expression of theatrical long-suffering that she'd been perfecting since approximately age 8. He called his contact on the bus. I need everything you have on James Webb. Current, last 2 years. Company records, financial filings for Arlen, anything that shows who's funding them. That's going to take more than an hour. I've got until tonight, but I need whatever you can get. He lowered his voice. The bus was mostly empty, but habit was habit. And I need to know if Webb has any board-level connections, investment relationships, consulting relationships, anything that puts him in a room with corporate directors. You have a specific name? Richard Hale. A pause. Hale. That name is familiar. He's on Whitmore's board. No. I know him from somewhere else. The voice went quiet in the way it did when his contact was pulling something from memory. Private equity. He had a firm in the early 2000s, Hale Meridian Capital. The bus seat was suddenly very hard underneath him. Say that again. Hale Meridian Capital, small PE firm. They were involved in a few tech acquisitions around 2012-2013. I'm pretty sure they were a co-investor in a pause. Daniel. They were a co-investor in the acquisition, the Meridian Project acquisition. He stopped breathing for a moment. Just a moment. Then everything reorganized itself in his mind. The way a collapsed building reorganizes itself when you finally find the load-bearing wall that failed. Hale was in the acquisition. He had access to the Meridian framework through his investment stake. He wouldn't have had direct access to the source code. He wouldn't have needed direct access. He had enough position to know what was in the acquisition, to know that the framework existed, to know who had built it. His voice was very quiet now, and he had enough influence to make sure that when someone accessed those files, the logs showed my name. This is bigger than Webb. I know. Daniel, if Hale is involved at the board level and he has a financial interest in the breach succeeding, you are standing in the middle of something that is federal level. This isn't a corporate security incident. This is... I know what it is. Keep going on the Webb research. Send me whatever you find. He hung up and looked out the window of the bus at the neighborhood moving past. The streets he'd learned, the blocks he could walk in the dark, the city that was his because he'd chosen to make it his instead of going back to the world that used to hold him. He thought about Hale sitting in that conference room chair with his coffee, completely comfortable, completely certain that the man across the table was either going to be intimidated or manipulated into a direction that served him. He thought about the 6 years Hale had sat on Clara's board, watching her company grow, waiting for the moment when the numbers were right, when the investment in a $180 million development cycle made the risk of an inside job worth taking. He thought about Rachel, unexpectedly, not with grief, just with the clear, clean certainty of love that doesn't require the person to be present anymore. She would have told him to be careful. She would have also told him that being careful and doing the right thing were not mutually exclusive, and that the only people who acted like they were people trying to talk you out of doing the right thing. The bus stopped. He got off. He walked the 2 blocks to the school. Lily was standing outside the front entrance, exactly as predicted, backpack on both shoulders, expression of theatrical long-suffering fully deployed. "You're 7 minutes late." "I know, I'm sorry." "I counted." "I know you did." He put his arm around her shoulders, and they started walking. She leaned into him briefly, the automatic lean, the one she'd been doing since she was small, and that she probably didn't even notice she still did, and then straightened back up with the dignity of an 11-year-old who had a reputation to maintain. "How was school?" "Fine. We did fractions. I already knew fractions." "I know you did." "Mrs. Peterson said I should be in the advanced math group. What do you think?" "I think the advanced math group has homework on Fridays." She considered this. "But also I'm bored." "That's a real trade-off. What would you do?" He thought about it seriously because she asked seriously, and she'd been able to tell the difference since she was 6 years old. "I'd take the challenge. Being bored is its own kind of hard." She thought about it. "Okay." The way she said okay when she'd already made the decision and just wanted to hear him confirm it. "Dad?" "Yeah." "You seem like you're thinking about something." "I'm always thinking about something." "Something big. You get this specific face." He looked down at her. "What specific face?" "Like you're doing math in your head, but the math is about people." She said it matter-of-factly, and he laughed. A real laugh. The kind that caught him off guard because the description was so accurate it was almost uncomfortable. That's a very perceptive thing to say. "I know." She was quiet for half a block. Then, "Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine. There's something at work I'm trying to figure out, but I'm going to figure it out." "Okay?" The real okay. The trusting one. "Can we get tacos?" "Yeah, we can get tacos." They got tacos. They sat at the small table in the kitchen of the apartment with the thin walls, and Lily talked about fractions, and Mrs. Peterson and a girl in her class named Sophie who had said something either brave or reckless at recess, depending on how you looked at it. And Daniel listened with the full, undivided attention that he had made the central commitment of his parenting. Because the world would give her plenty of people who were physically present and mentally elsewhere, and he had decided a long time ago that he was not going to be one of them. After dinner, Lily did her homework at the kitchen table. Daniel sat across from her with his old laptop and worked. His contact had sent the web files. He went through them carefully, building a map in a document that existed only in his head. The kind of map that didn't need to be written down because he would not forget a single note of it. Webb had founded Arlen Security Group in 2018 with initial funding from 2 investors. One was a small tech sector venture fund. The other was a private holding company called HMC Advisors. He searched HMC Advisors. It was a Delaware LLC, registered in 2016. Principal office in New York. The registered agent was a law firm. Standard practice for anonymizing ownership. But the HMC initials combined with the timeline, combined with what his contact had told him about Hale Meridian Capital, formed a picture that he didn't need a magnifying glass to see. Hale had funded Webb's firm, which meant Hale hadn't just used the audit as an opportunity. He had constructed the audit. He had created Arlen Security Group, installed Webb as its face, and then positioned the firm to win the Whitmore Systems engagement. He'd had the inside escort in place, had ensured Webb got the access he needed, and had built in the Meridian frame around Daniel as a contingency that would, if necessary, redirect any investigation away from himself and toward a man who had conveniently showed up inside the building. Except Daniel had found the process in 3 seconds on a Tuesday morning, and now the clock was running in a different direction. Lily went to bed at 9:30. He kissed the top of her head, turned off the light, and sat in the kitchen in the quiet that came after she fell asleep, the specific quiet of a small apartment when its only noisy element has gone still. His phone rang. Clara. It moved. He sat up straight. When? 8 minutes ago. Kevin flagged it. The process changed behavior. It started generating an outbound signal. He contained it. He tried. He partially redirected it, but he didn't stop it completely before it pushed a packet. How much got through? He thinks a small data payload. Maybe 30 seconds of activity log data. Nothing structural, but it got out. Her voice was tight but controlled. Someone knows the process has been touched. Did Kevin trace the outbound address? He's working on it. He's got a partial, enough to narrow it to a specific network range, not enough to pin an endpoint. Send it to me. I can work with a partial address in ways Kevin's standard tools can't. A pause. Then the data came through. A string of numbers on his text, the partial IP, and the behavior log Kevin had captured. He opened his laptop and started working. Lily was asleep 12 feet away. The refrigerator hummed. The city outside was doing what cities did at 9:30 at night. Indifferent and continuous. He worked for 50 minutes. His hands remembered the keyboard the way a musician's hands remembered an instrument. Without his permission. With a fluency that bypassed whatever intellectual reluctance he carried. He traced the partial address through 3 proxy layers. Patient work. Methodical work. The kind that required you to stay with it when it went cold and not force it when you didn't have enough yet. He found the endpoint at 10:22. It was a server registered to a data management company in Chicago. The company's client list wasn't public, but the registered address for the company's principal office matched an address in the River North neighborhood of Chicago that also showed up when he cross-referenced it as the business address for a private wealth management operation called Hale Capital Group. He stared at the screen. He had it. Not all of it. Not the financial trail. Not the full operational picture. Not the documented chain of authority that a prosecutor would need, but he had the thread, and he had pulled it all the way from Clara's laptop on the 42nd floor to Richard Hale's private server in Chicago, and he had the access logs with the false credential, and he had the contractor badge records, and he had 11 years of documented professional connection between Webb and Hale running through a holding company built on the initials of a defunct private equity firm. He called Clara. She answered before the first ring finished. I have an address. It traces to Hale. The silence on her end was the kind that fills up with a person restructuring everything they thought they knew. I need it all in writing. Everything. Tonight. I'll have it to you by midnight. Daniel. Her voice was different. Not the CEO voice, not the scalpel. Something underneath that. If this is what it looks like, if he's been on my board for 6 years, sitting in those rooms, I know. How do I trust my own judgment after something like this? He thought about that. Not as a reflex, but as a real question. Because she'd asked it as a real question. You trust it because your judgment isn't what failed. He's a sophisticated man who built a sophisticated deception over years. That's not a failure of perception. That's a successful crime. He paused. What you do now is what matters. She was quiet for a moment. You could have walked away this morning when I... She stopped. When I spoke to you the way I did. You could have walked away. I know. Why didn't you? He thought about the framework in the system, the thing built from his work, used without his consent, pointing at him like an accusation. He thought about the specific satisfaction of doing the thing you were built to do after years of doing other things. He thought about Lily asleep in the next room, and Rachel's eyes, and the weight of a life that didn't always go the way you planned but took you sometimes exactly where you needed to be. Because it was the right thing to do, and those don't come along as often as they should. He could hear her exhale. Then, "Thank you. Get some sleep after you finish this. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." He hung up, pulled his laptop back to the center of the table, and started writing.